I find it strange that I'm sharing a story that is so personal to me, but I would just like to get some understanding from it. I come from Manhattan, and I'm currently living here. It starts from 2002 when my father, brought up in the Bronx but moved to Upper East Side, decided to give back to his community, since it has, he says, made him who he is. He set up a graffiti club, as I should put it, where kids in rougher neighborhoods could come and get off the streets and express their emotions through art. It was successful. Some trouble here and there, but went great. I decided to go, and I befriended some people who, if it wasn't for the club, I would have never thought they'd be friends. Cut the long story short, I really got on with Jay. Jay, not his real name, but for privacy's sake, with whom I could have so many laughs with. Tragically, in 2003, he was shot down in Harlem. It was a tragic blow to the club and me personally. It affected me more than I could ever explain. It hurts, and still does now, just to think about him. I visited the spot a few weeks later. I bent down and cried with my head in my hands. As I did, I felt a hand on my shoulder. And I heard a laugh, then a mumble I will never make out. But it sounded something like, "Don't cry about me." I thought it was a respectful person, yet seconds later when I stood up and turned around, nobody was there. I wasn't frightened, I just assumed that it was someone who walked off fast. Driving back home, still crying, I stopped at a light. I wiped my eyes and looked out the driver's side window at some girls playing double dutch. On the steps of the building beside them, I could have sworn that I saw Jay. I was so convinced that I shouted his name. The kids were bewildered at who I was shouting at. And the man I saw didn't even look towards me. His eyes just stayed fixated somewhere over the top of the car. I drove off fast, sure that I was going crazy. It wasn't until the club stopped in 2005 that strange things happened again. As I prepared food in the kitchen, my music player blasted a Tupac song I think is called Hold Your Head. It was from an album called The Don Columinati, The 7-Day Theory, which Jay persuaded me to buy, but I never listened to it since the day I bought it. This overwhelming feeling of happiness came over me. Even though I knew I should be scared as for how a CD had gotten out of my bedroom closet into the stereo in my living room and then played by itself, I walked into the living room smiling and slightly laughing. And then I heard a laugh, very loud, from by the hallway. I then became scared, even though I was so familiar with that laugh. I just stood there and burst into tears, feeling that gutted feeling I felt all those years ago. That night, I got into my bed. My bedroom door opened. Thinking it was my cat, I got up and closed it. Now, this is the part that I find so unbelievable and disturbing to think about. Halfway down the hallway, a figure stood, just dark, with no features. It stood directly in front of a picture Jay and another kid had created. For about a minute, I stood there bewildered, too scared to move, staring at the figure that barely moved. Then I just slammed my door and ran to my bed like a child. Since then, I've never seen anything like that. But sometimes I don't feel alone in my home. The channels on the TV have the tendency to switch to certain music channels. I've never told anybody except my best friend and my father. On here, I'm hoping people are open-minded and help me understand what happened. Even though I never really believed in the paranormal, I really do think Jay is around me at times, which makes me happy to know. It really does scare me, the idea of a ghost. But if it's Jay, I know he's there just to joke around and to see if I'm okay. But I can't help thinking that people become ghosts on Earth because they are stopped from going to the afterlife, because they have unfinished business. Thank you for allowing me to tell this story, which has been bothering me for so long. My experience happened around 1990 or 1991 in New York City. I attempted an all-day Saturday spiritual theater dance workshop. Throughout the day, we did many types of activities and exercises, most of which included meditation, movement, voice, and acting exercises. When I left the workshop, I was definitely in an altered state of consciousness, feeling very light and like I was walking on clouds. It was around 4:30 or so I decided to stop on my way home at the, what was then, Red Apple Market on 13th Street and 7th Avenue, to get something to eat or to buy something to take home. It was a very small grocery store and very quiet at this particular time. I took a cart and noticed 2 cashiers in the front, and then began slowly roaming the first aisle. I was about halfway down the aisle and was staring at the mayonnaise, contemplating on making some tuna salad. Then all of a sudden, there was a very loud exhale of breath right in my ear. I could hear and feel the breath. It was chilling, to say the least. I immediately turned my head quickly around and saw a man standing there 3 feet away from me. He was very scraggly looking, around 75 years old with long salt and pepper hair, with very piercing blue eyes and heavy eyebrows. He just kept staring at me and didn't say anything. He seemed angry and seemed as if he was looking through me. I thought he was some crazy homeless guy that had just wandered in from the street and was just trying to scare me. He was successful at that. Yet, I immediately told him firmly to get away and leave me alone. I quickly took my cart around the corner to the next aisle, but decided I should tell the manager in the front what had happened, so he wouldn't bother anyone else. I went directly to the front of the store and repeated my story and asked if they could tell the man to leave the store. The manager and cashier both looked at each other, then looked at me, like I was the crazy one, and said, "I'm sorry, but you're the only person in the store, and have been since you walked in." I said, No, you must have missed him. He was right here in that first aisle." They just both stared at me. The truth is they were at the very front of the store. The store had turn aisles, and I think they probably would have seen someone else come in. But at the time I left, thinking they must have missed that guy. It has stayed with me ever since, and it wasn't until many years later that I realized the man had to have been a full-bodied apparition. I believe I was only able to see him at that moment because of the meditation. It is the only explanation for what happened that day at the Red Apple. What I'm about to tell you happened a few days before Christmas. But first, let me give you a little background. I'm currently a freshman in high school. It's a pretty big school with tons of classrooms, a library, and a huge gym. It's about 15 minutes from where I live, because I live in a neighborhood in the middle of the forest. I don't really know anything about the school except that it was built in 1957. So as I said before, it was Friday, the last day of school before Christmas vacation. Every Friday, me and my best friend Vanessa have guitar lessons. I didn't really feel like going because I had extra classes today and I was really tired. I decided I was going to call my dad so he can pick me up early, but it was a little too late because our class was already starting. After the whole thing was over, it was already 5 p.m. and dark outside. And to make things worse, there was a huge snowstorm out there. I felt horrible and had a really bad headache. All I wanted to do was go home, take a shower, go upstairs to my room, and read a book or something. It wasn't until I was packing my guitar that I realized I'd lost my phone. Me and Vanessa were walking through the huge empty school. Vanessa was calling my phone number, and I was telling myself how stupid I was. There was almost no chance of finding it. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack. We found the phone somehow in the cafeteria 15 minutes later. After we found the phone, we had to walk downstairs because the cafeteria was on the last floor. Most of the lights were turned off, so the whole school was dark and creepy. As we were walking down the stairs, I had a feeling that someone was behind me or stalking me or something like that. One time when I turned around, I swear I saw a little blonde girl looking at me. I tried to convince myself that there was a mirror there and that it was my own reflection. But I have black hair, and what I saw had blonde. And it was almost as if the girl was glowing. We got really freaked out by this and ran down the stairs as fast as we could. My dad worked late today, so he couldn't pick me up. Thankfully, Vanessa's mom offered to drive me home. The snow was really falling hard. Vanessa's mom had dropped me off near the driveway. Normally, I'm not scared of the dark, but that blonde girl creeped me out so much that I was running so fast I didn't even bother to close the driveway gate all the way. Once I was in my yard, I felt safer. And I slowed down a little. I could hear my golden retrievers barking inside. Our blue minivan was in the garage and there was a silver Toyota parked in the driveway, meaning that my grandmother had already arrived from Syracuse. I looked up at the house and noticed that the lights were on in the upstairs hallway, in the kitchen, and I could also see Christmas lights and shadows in the living room, meaning that everyone was home. After I took a shower, changed, and ate dinner, I went upstairs to my room and turned on my laptop. Downstairs, I can hear my golden retrievers barking and my mom and grandma talking. "I just don't get it," I heard my mom say. "I know, who would go for a walk in this kind of weather?" said a voice that sounded like my grandma's. I set my laptop down on my bed and looked out the window. All I could see was the forest around the house and the car parked in the driveway. So I walked downstairs and asked them what they were talking about. But after a few seconds, the answer was obvious. There, walking down the dark road in the snow, was the little blonde girl I had seen earlier. I'm from New York City, Queens. And I'd say that I'm not very gullible and I don't scare very easily. But my recent ongoing experiences have made me quite the believer. I was about 6 to 7 months pregnant, and I was laying down on my airbed in the basement of my home. I was alone because my husband worked the graveyard shift. I just finished watching a particularly long Scooby-Doo marathon and started to doze off. I couldn't have been asleep for more than 15 minutes when I had the feeling that someone was standing over me. I opened my eyes thinking that one of my brothers would be there, but I was very shocked and surprised to see this black figure standing over me with his or its arms outstretched to its sides. Sure enough, it scared the crap out of me. It scared me so much that I thought I was going to go into labor. To make this part of my story short, I sat up and yelled at this thing. Whatever it was disappeared as fast as it appeared. And I spent the rest of the night with all the lights on until morning. The next couple of weeks, I was in the basement alone. About 9 in the morning, I don't know what made me look over to the staircase, but I saw that shadow, as if someone was standing at the top of the staircase. The way my house is built, the bathroom is right by the staircase, so all the light from outside shines through the window, reflecting light onto the staircase, so you can tell when there's someone standing on the steps. I thought it was my mom, so I called out to her, but the person didn't reply, and I saw the shadow move from the staircase. I started hearing a female's voice humming in my living room. It wasn't very loud, and given the fact that this humming was accompanied by footsteps, I went upstairs and there was nobody there. To make a longer story shorter, I gave birth to my son. A year later, my son and I are playing in the hallway, and he suddenly stopped and stared at the ceiling. I tried to take him to my room, and he just wouldn't budge. He started doing this when he was 1. Until this day, he'd be playing and chatting up a storm until he gets to the hallway. It's like he turns into a completely different child. He's about 2.5 now, and I'm starting to think that there's something in that hallway. I'm definitely convinced that there's something in my basement because my son used to love to play in the basement all the time. Since the age of 1, he refuses to come down to the basement. He'll either stand at the top of the stairs crying hysterically until I come and get him, or if I do get him and come down, he won't stay for long. Recently, he's been terrified to come out of my bedroom and into the hallway. I just don't know what to do. I've also seen this black figure again last month. I was getting ready for school and I was having a discussion with my husband. And he was facing me when I saw this black thing go zooming down the stairs right behind him. I'm honestly at my wit's end, and I don't know what to do anymore. It really disturbs me that I'm seeing this black shadow all over the place. About 3 years ago, I started dating my boyfriend. Let's call him L. I moved in with him almost immediately, and things were great at first. And then I started to notice some very bizarre sleeping behaviors of his. He would sit up Indian style in bed, and one night he came after me with a bat. It turned out that he had been sleepwalking and was trying to go after the man in the suit and hat. At first, I thought nothing of this, that it was just an extreme night terror. As things progressively got worse, I started questioning this. Some nights I would find him sleeping, sitting up and yelling, "Shut up or go away." One night I woke up to find L asleep, but he wasn't in bed. He was standing in the corner of the room, with his hand leaned in towards the corner but not touching it, about an inch away. This really frightened me, and I demanded that he tell me more about this man. We ended up naming him Frank, after the bunny in Donnie Darko. Apparently, he didn't just dream about Frank. He would appear in our bedroom. He was a silhouette of a man in a militant suit, similar to the uniform of a Nazi in a hat. When he would appear in our room, he would mostly sit in the computer chair at our desk, stand in the corner I found L standing in, or stand over our bed at my side. I couldn't see Frank, but I always had a very bad feeling in the bedroom, like I was being watched. When Frank was in our room, he would speak in an unintelligible, made-up language. But L could communicate with him telepathically. Sometimes L spoke German to Frank, which is strange because he couldn't speak German other than those encounters. Frank also appeared in every single dream L had for the last 2 years. Whether it be in the background somewhere or involved in the dream directly, the episodes with Frank started to increase more and more. It was starting to worry me, and I can see L getting more and more depressed and unmotivated, almost weak. One night I heard L having a conversation with Frank. I couldn't remember exactly what L said, but I shook him out of it. He was almost in a trance when Frank was in our room. I asked him what Frank was saying. At first L wouldn't tell me, but eventually he told me that Frank wanted to be inside him. This really alarmed me, because for some time I had suspected that Frank was a dark entity of sorts. I told L under no circumstances was he to let Frank inside him. L didn't want to listen to me. He seemed to think that Frank would make him stronger, and this worried me. I called up my church to inquire about having the house blessed. They called back, and when I explained my situation, they said they would call back but never did. One night I woke up to L giving permission for Frank to enter him. I tried to shake him out of it, but the damage was already done. L stopped having the night disturbances, but his personality changed. He started setting fires in the woods a mile from our house and in the abandoned house next door. He started doing drugs and acting aggressively even when he wasn't using the drugs. Once in the middle of the night, L sat up in bed, and something about it made me very nervous. I felt my fight or flight kick in. I called L's name several times to no avail, and then I said Frank, and L slowly turned his head towards me with a scary smile slowly coming across his face. I screamed and seemed to snap him out of it. One night, after much pleading, I convinced him to try to get rid of Frank. It was very strange. Elle was arguing with Frank, but he was communicating with Frank through some other entity who Elle called Steve. Apparently, Frank warned that I was next. However, after that night, he never saw Frank in our room or in his dreams. I know you are probably thinking that it might just be Elle messing with me, or a mental illness. But I could feel something very strongly present in our room. I was losing sleep over it. Also, Elle was not the type to play pranks, especially such elaborate ones. He also had a very strange look in his eyes during these interactions. I'd like to know if Frank was a demon or a shadow person or dark entity. To this day, it still bothers me. Ghouls, thank you for being patient. I apologize that this is coming out on Sunday instead of Friday, but I got it out, and it's decently long, and I hope you enjoyed it. So yeah, ghouls, New York. There were like hundreds of stories I was like paging through, and a lot of them seemed like super fake. A lot of them were just written terribly. I had to go through so many. But I hope you like the ones I did pick. I mean, New York is huge, so there has to be a bajillion hauntings, right? I'd assume so. I mean, New Jersey was pretty crazy. So, yes. Secret word of the day. It's gonna be Yoda. Like Yoda from Star Wars, because he's looking at me right now on my little notepad, and he's adorable. But, as always, the last video will be on the top left, the next video will be on the bottom left. All my social medias are on the screen, as well as in the description box below. And remember, there's always someone, or something, watching you.